chief operating officer of a 24 billion euro tech empire, told his colleagues he was flying to Manila to find 1.9 billion euros that had just gone missing. He stepped onto a private jet and he hasn't been seen in public ever since. Today, Jan Marsalek is wanted by Interpol for orchestrating one of the biggest corporate frauds Europe has ever seen. The collapse that made Wirecard the first company in Germany's top stock index to ever go bankrupt. He's also accused of something stranger, running a Russian spy ring from inside Moscow. But the craziest part isn't the spy ring, it's how boring the answer is. For 10 straight years, nobody did the one thing that would have ended this on day one. Nobody picked up the phone and asked the bank if the money was actually there. Okay, to understand how big this collapse was, you have to understand what Wirecard was supposed to be. Germany does not really do tech giants, right? It does cars, it does machines, it does enormous, serious industrial companies that have been around for 100 years. What it does not have is a Google or an Apple, or really anything close. So when a payments company out of a quiet suburb of Munich started climbing and climbing and climbing, the whole country sort of leaned in and started to hope. Finally, they said, a German tech company. And by 2018, Wirecard had made it. It was promoted into the DAX, Germany's blue chip index, the top 30 companies in the whole country. It was now sitting in the same club as BMW, Siemens, Adidas, and at its peak, the company was worth more than 24 billion euros. For a brief, strange moment, this payments firm from Aschheim was worth more than the Dutch bank, a bank that had been around since the 1870s. When Angela Merkel flew to China in 2019, she personally talked up Wirecard to officials in China. The chancellor of Germany was doing sales for this company. This is how real it looked. So what did Wirecard actually do? I need you to stay with me on this one, because the boring answer, as per the usual, is where the whole lie lives. Wirecard was a payment processor. When you tap your card or your phone to buy a coffee, there's a whole chain of invisible middlemen that move that money from your bank to the shop's bank in about a second. One of those middlemen is called an acquirer. The acquirer connects the merchant to the card networks, handles the transaction, and, of course, skims a tiny fee off the top. It's a few cents. That's about it. But run a few cents across billions of transactions, and you have a money printer that nobody ever sees. Wirecard's speciality, right from the start, was the customers nobody else wanted to touch. The company was founded in 1999 to process payments for adult content and online gambling. High risk, slightly grubby, and very, very profitable. That was the DNA. A company that made its money in the corners other people avoided, and that always seemed to take the shortcut where one was available. It didn't even go public the normal way. In 2005, it slipped onto the stock market through the shell of a defunct company, skipping the scrutiny a normal listing brings. Two men ran this thing, okay? The first was Markus Braun, the CEO. Austrian, technical, a little intense, but he wore a black turtleneck and very deliberately styled himself after Steve Jobs. It was very, very deliberate. He was the visionary, the guy on stage promising that Wirecard was building the future of money. He was also the company's largest shareholder, which on paper made him a billionaire. The second is Jan Marsalek, the COO, also Austrian, Where Braun was the visionary, Marsalek was the operator, the charming one, the guy who actually ran the international business out in Asia. And Marsalek liked to tell stories. He told people he had connections and intelligence. He claimed he once traveled to Palmyra in the middle of the Syrian civil war as a guest of the Russian military. At the time, the people around him mostly assumed it was just bluster, right? A rich executive just showing off. Keep that in mind, though, because as per the usual with these, we're going to come back to it, and it's going to get a lot less funny than it is right now. Before we go on, I need you to hold on to one thing. All of Wirecard's most beautiful numbers, the eye-watering profits that made it a star, came from one specific corner of the business. Partners in faraway places, Dubai, Singapore, Manila, and a giant pile of cash sitting in accounts on the other side of the world. Nobody in Munich ever went and looked at it. Why would they? The numbers were gorgeous, and gorgeous numbers are the easiest thing in the world to believe. So let's open it up. How does a company invent profit out of nothing and get away with it for a decade? It starts with a piece of jargon, and I'll only make you learn it just one time, I promise. Third-party acquiring, okay? The plain English version is that Wirecard didn't have a license to process payments in every country. So the story it told was simple. In places where it couldn't legally operate, it used local partner companies to do the processing, and it booked a share of their profits as its own. On paper, that's pretty clever. It's global reach and none of the legal headache. But in reality, it's the perfect place to hide a lie. Because now your most important business is happening somewhere far away, run by people you've never met in countries where nobody is going to check. And three partners did almost all the heavy lifting. A company called Al-Alam in Dubai, a company called PayEasy in Manila, and a group called Senjo in Singapore. According to the Financial Times, which got a hold of the internal files, those three partners generated more than half of Wirecard's revenue in 2016, and almost all of it was actual profit. So the obvious question is, who are these companies? The Financial Times went and looked. Al-Alam, the Dubai partner, supposedly pushing hundreds of millions of euros through its system, turned out to be a tiny operation. Reporters found a list of the clients it was supposedly serving. They started calling them, and a lot of those clients had never heard of Al-Alam. PayEasy, the Manila partner, shared an office address with a bus tour company, and another partner the Financial Times tracked down was registered to a house in a town in the Philippines where a family of 12 was living. That was it. Those were the great international engines powering a company worth 24 billion euros, a bus company's address, and somebody's house. Now, the cash. This is really the clever part, and it's worth slowing down a bit here for it, because it's the heart of the whole machine. So, Wirecard said the profits for all this partner business piled up over time as cash. And that cash, it said, was being held in trustee accounts. Real quick, let me define that once and then drop the jargon again. A trustee is just a neutral third party who holds money on your behalf in escrow, so everyone trusts it's really there, okay? And because of the way Wirecard kept its books, money sitting with a trustee counted as Wirecard's own cash. So as long as some trustee somewhere said, yes, I'm holding 2 billion euros for Wirecard, that 2 billion showed up on the balance sheet as real money the company owed. By 2019, that number had grown to 1.9 billion euros, supposedly sitting at two banks in the Philippines, BDO and Bank of the Philippine Islands, under a trustee in Manila named Mark Tolentino. For the record, Tolentino has denied any wrongdoing and says his identity was stolen. But hold that thought too, okay? So you've got 1.9 billion euros that's supposedly just sitting in a bank account. How do you prove a number like that is even real? Easy. You get the bank to confirm it. And this is the center of the entire story. Imagine you walk into a bank and ask for a loan. Don't worry, you tell them, I'm good for it. I've got 2 million in savings. They ask for proof. So you don't show them a bank statement. You show them a screenshot you made yourself and a letter written by your friend who swears the money's there. And the bank goes, great, good enough. See you next year. That's more or less what Wirecard's auditors did for 10 years. Except the number wasn't 2 million, it was 2 billion. The auditor was EY, Ernst and Young, one of the 4 biggest accounting firms on the planet. EY signed off on Wirecard's books every single year from 2009 through 2018. Clean opinion every time. The whole reason a giant like EY exists is to be the grown-up in the room. The independent check that says, yes, we looked, the money is real. And the way they checked the cash was to rely on documents and screenshots handed to them by Wirecard and by the trustee. There was a period when up to €1 billion was supposedly sitting at a bank in Singapore called OCBC. For more than 3 years, EY never wrote to OCBC directly to confirm it. There's an actual name for the one thing that they skipped. It's called a bank confirmation. You send the bank a letter, the bank sends one back. It's one of the most basic procedures in the entire field. It's literally auditing 101, lesson 1. And for €1 billion, for years, nobody actually did it. And the documents EY was trusting, where did the proof actually come from? A lot of it came from a corporate services firm in Singapore called Citadel, run by a man named RS. Between 2016 and 2018, Citadel issued 13 confirmation letters claiming to hold over €1 billion for Wirecard. They were forged. RS was later convicted on 13 counts and, as reported in early 2026, sentenced to 10 years. So now I think you can start seeing the whole shape of it. Fake profits from partner companies that barely existed. Cash that was really just a stack of letters, and an auditor who took the letters at face value year after year after year without ever calling the bank. Each layer pointed to the next one, and every single layer was a forgery. This next bit takes it from a clever trick to something much bigger. Strip out the partner business, strip out the fake profits, and look at what Wirecard actually was underneath. A pretty ordinary payments company, barely profitable, sometimes not even profitable at all. The 1.9 billion euros wasn't some side pocket of a healthy business. It was the plug. It was the number that made everything else look real. If you take that away, and there's no tech champion, there's no company worth more than Dutch Bank. There's just a mid-sized firm struggling to make money wearing a costume. The fraud wasn't a part of Wirecard. The fraud was Wirecard. Now, if the whole thing was this shaky, surely somebody would notice, right? People did. And really, that's what kind of made my skin crawl while researching this. Start with the short sellers. These are investors who make money when a stock falls, which means they go hunting for companies they think are rotten. In 2016, 2 of them, Matthew Earl and Fraser Paring, published a 101-page report under the name Zatara, laying out detailed allegations of fraud at Wirecard. The stock dropped about 21% in a day. And for their trouble, Earl and Paring were surveilled and hacked. The University of Toronto's Citizen Lab later connected the hacking campaign against Wirecard's critics to a hackers for hire operation. So again, this isn't me really being dramatic. Researchers actually traced it back to Wirecard. Then there's the journalist, Dan McCrum at the Financial Times. Back in 2014, a hedge fund manager tipped him off and told him to go take a look at the, quote, German gangsters. McCrum and the Financial Times spent years digging. In January 2019, they published a story built on leaked internal documents showing contracts in the Singapore office being forged and backdated. The stock cratered again. And then there's the whistleblower. Inside Wirecard's own Singapore office, a young lawyer named Pav Gill had been running an internal investigation into exactly this kind of thing. Guess what? It got shut down. He got pushed out, but his mother kept copies of the documents, and she helped make sure they reached the Financial Times. So this thing all started to come apart because somebody's mom held onto the files. So you've got short sellers, you've got one of the most respected newspapers in the world, and you've got an inside whistleblower, all pointing at the same company saying the same thing. This is fraud. This is the part that stops being a normal fraud story and becomes something I just still find really hard to believe, because the German financial regulator looked at all of this evidence. The regulator is called BaFin, and it's the watchdog, the body whose entire job is to catch exactly this. BaFin looked at the short sellers and the journalists and the whistleblower, and it decided the problem was the people raising the alarm. That's crazy. In February 2019, BaFin did something it had never done before and has never done since. It banned investors from betting against Wirecard stock, not during a market crash, not across the whole exchange, for one single company. To protect it, the watchdog stepped in front of the company and shielded it from the people trying to expose it. But it gets worse. German prosecutors open a criminal investigation into the Financial Times journalists for market manipulation. Yeah, read that back. Listen to it again. They investigated the reporters, not the company the reporters were writing about. The system that exists to catch fraud spent its energy protecting the fraud and going after the people exposing it. But why? A lot of it comes down to national pride. Wirecard was Germany's tech success story, the one homegrown company that could stand next to Silicon Valley. Nobody wanted it to be fake. And when an entire establishment has decided that you are the future becomes very, very hard to question. It even fooled the smart money. In 2019, the Japanese giant SoftBank announced what looked like a 900 million euro vote of confidence in Wirecard. Huge headline, right? The thing is, the deal was structured so that SoftBank itself had almost no money actually at risk. The real cash came from outside investors who bought repackaged bonds tied to the deal. So even the famous endorsement, when you actually pulled it apart, was mostly someone else being left to hold the bag. By late 2019, the Financial Times had published too much and too specifically for the company to keep waving it away. So Wirecard's own board made a decision to clear its name once and for all. It hired a second independent firm called KPMG to do a special audit for it. They wanted KPMG to look into everything, prove the doubters wrong. Guess what? That was a mistake. KPMG published its findings in April of 2020. And the conclusion was devastating, precisely because KPMG had been brought in by Wirecard itself. KPMG said it could not verify the bulk of the profits from the partner business, and it could not confirm around €1 billion of the cash. The company that hired the auditors to exonerate it had instead been told by those very same auditors that the money could not be found. After that, the dominoes fell very fast. June 2020, EY finally, for the 2019 accounts, demanded real proof of the 1.9 billion euros. So everyone went to the source, and the Philippine banks, BDO and BPI, said they had no relationship with Wirecard at all. The documents, they said, were forged. The Central Bank of the Philippines went further and said the money had never even entered the country's financial system. The 1.9 billion euros wasn't misplaced. It wasn't stuck in the wrong account. It had never even been there. On the 18th of June, EY refused to sign off on the accounts. On the 19th, Marcus Braun resigned, and Jan Marsalek told his colleagues he was flying to Manila to find the money and prove it was all real. He did not fly to Manila, though. He was driven across the border into Austria to a small airfield outside Vienna, and he boarded a chartered private jet to Minsk in Belarus. From there, the trail leads to Russia. And just as everything was coming apart, there was one more eerie detail. The former Wirecard executive who had run that Manila partner company was registered as dead in the Philippines. Interestingly, people involved with this story have a way of just vanishing. On the 22nd of June, Wirecard admitted it. The 1.9 billion euros in the company's own careful wording, with a prevailing likelihood, did not exist. Braun was arrested. On the 25th of June, Wirecard filed for insolvency, the first company in the history of Germany's blue chip index to go bankrupt. A 24 billion euro empire was gone in a single week. The stock fell from over 100 euros to about 1 euro. The insolvency administrator who took over the wreckage, a lawyer named Michael Jaffe, said it about as plainly as anybody could. The partner business, he testified, did not exist. The 1.9 billion never existed. The money, he said, never arrived there because there was never any money. The money is the easy part, though, because there wasn't any, right? The harder question is who paid for that? Around 50,000 shareholders. Ordinary people who had bought into the idea of Germany's tech champion. They were wiped out almost overnight. And thousands of Wirecard employees, people who came to work and built real products inside a company that just turned out to be sitting on a fake one, lost their jobs. Hundreds were laid off within weeks of the collapse. They didn't run the fraud. They just worked there. But they're the ones that paid for it dearly. Marcus Braun was charged with fraud, breach of trust, market manipulation, and accounting falsification. His trial began in Munich in late 2022, and as of the middle of 2026, there's still no verdict. Braun maintains that he is innocent. His defense is that he was a victim too, that Marsalek and others ran the fraud and hid it from him. The court has called him strongly suspected and a flight risk, and he has been in custody since 2020. But I need to be very precise here, okay? Because this channel lives or dies on getting things correct. Charged is not convicted. As of now, no one has ruled on Braun's guilt, so do keep that in mind. EY, the auditor that never called the bank, was fined and barred from taking on major public clients in Germany for 2 years. The firm described what happened as elaborate and sophisticated fraud, which is true in all fairness. It is also a fairly good description of the exact thing EY was paid for years to catch, and it didn't. And the head of BaFin, the regulator that banned short selling and helped chase the journalists, left his job. He called the scandal a complete disaster. Germany went on to rewrite its financial oversight laws because of this one company. And then there's Marsalek. Because what nobody in Munich understood while he was running the Asia business and telling those stories about his intelligence friends, well, it turns out those stories were true. In 2024, a joint investigation by the outlets The Insider, Der Spiegel and Bellingcat reported that Marsalek had been recruited by Russian military intelligence, the GRU, roughly a decade before all of this, that he had used Wirecard's money and infrastructure to help support Russian operations abroad. And in 2025, at the Old Bailey in London, a cell of Bulgarian nationals was convicted of spying for Russia. The court named Jan Marsalek as the man directing them. The link between the agents on the ground and Russian intelligence. Investigators recovered more than 80,000 messages connected to the operation. There's actually a selfie of Marsalek wearing a Russian military uniform. The head of the Metropolitan Police Counterterrorism Command described the whole thing as Russia outsourcing its spying. So the man who hid 1.9 billion euros that never existed was not just a fraudster. He was, obviously, but he was also, allegedly, a Russian intelligence asset the entire time, using a German blue-chip company as his cover. As for where he is now, a coordinated investigation by several European news outlets in 2025 reported that Marsalek is living openly in Moscow under Russian protection, with new identities and even a new face. Russia says it has no idea where he is. One detail that kind of stuck with me after learning about it is that after the 2018 Novichok poisoning in England, Marsalek reportedly showed associates a classified document containing the chemical formula for the nerve agent. Make of that what you will, of course. So what's the lesson in all of this? The thing that I keep coming back to with this one is that this was not the story of a criminal genius, right? The trick itself was dumb. It was stupid. It was a stack of forged letters and a number that just didn't exist. And it held up for 10 years for one reason and one reason only. At every single step, the people whose actual job was to check, well, they just didn't. The auditor never called the bank. The regulator protected the company instead of investigating it. The whole apparatus was built on a quiet assumption that the documents in front of you must be real. And the entire Wirecard fraud was just one long, expensive proof that nobody was actually checking. And the really uncomfortable thing is, this hole was never really closed. Auditors still mostly rely on what their clients hand them. Regulators still get protective of their national champions. The exact gap that Wirecard drove a 24 billion euro truck straight through is still sitting right there in plain sight, waiting for the next one. That's it for this story. Next time on Overstated, a company worth billions of dollars, again, built on a forest, thousands of acres of timber in rural China, adding up to one of the hottest stocks on the market. There's just one problem, though. One short seller decided to fly out and drive to the exact coordinates where all of those trees were supposed to be. But what he found when he got there, or in this case didn't find, is where we'll pick it up. Headphones on, I'll see you next week.